The Shark Deck.
Hello, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Jimmy Fallon points out the Biden administration is ordering the Chinese parent company of TikTok to either sell the app or face a possible ban. And Fallon adds, if he bans TikTok, China will only be able to spy on us with literally everything else. Seth Meyers tags in, don't mess with Biden. He has no use for your addictive apps. Biden's the kind of guy who can make it through a whole 2-week vacation with nothing but a deck of cards and a print edition of Sports Illustrated. I was listening to Rogan with Bert Kreische. They were raving about Adrian Iapolucci. I agree. So here is an instance of Bert Kreische, Joe Rogan, and Johnny Mac being on the same page. I say that like we're not often on the same page. I mean, sometimes not exactly on Joe Rogan's page, but today we're all united. Adrian Iapolucci. Keep an eye on her. Very, very funny. And if you want to hear her, let me cross-promote. I spotlighted her on this week's weekly comedy thing. That's the show I host on the free Live One app. Get out your phone. Download Live One, look for something called The Weekly Comedy Thing. You'll find me doing something like this, except I can play comedians, including Adrian Iapolucci. I saw this story out of South by Southwest. William Shatner was your panelist, but he said his worst role ever was one time when he attempted to give a stand-up comedy performance as Captain Kirk. I've never heard of this. I have to deep dive and see if I can find this. So Shatner is doing stand-up as Captain Kirk, the joke being that Kirk would say cliché one-liner jokes and not understand why he wasn't funny. That's awful. Captain Kirk is cool. He wouldn't do that. Kirk should be able to get by on charisma alone. Shatner said the bit bombed spectacularly. It was probably the worst thing that ever happened to me. Chortle reviewed Ricky Gervais Armageddon. Ricky's been touring that show for some time, but Chortle went in because Ricky's getting very close to recording it for Netflix. Let me give you the lead here. They gave it 2.5 stars out of 5. Spoilers for the special coming up. Chortle writes, how nice would it be to write about Ricky Gervais without going over the same old cancel culture talking points, which so consumes those who rarely actually see live comedy, but he's the one leaning into it, setting himself up as the crusading defender of saying bad things in jest, whatever the wokey snowflakes say. Quoting from Chortle. Too often, Gervais's plan of attack is just to tell off-color jokes about, now this is the second time I'm reading this sentence, and the first time I got to the end of it and I was uncomfortable. Quoting as Chortle wrote it. Off-color jokes about pedophiles, AIDS-ridden African babies, the Holocaust, rape of severely disabled kids, dwarves, and pedophiles again. Sounds like a funny show, Ricky. Chortle writes, sometimes the sheer brutality of these lines is crushingly effective, but the effect is diminished by constant repetition. Any element of surprise is gone when all you ever do is voice the worst, most inappropriate things. Like an excitable teenager testing boundaries, he sniggers away at how naughty he's been as the grown-ups roll their eyes, hoping he'll grow out of it. At 61, there's little sign of that. They add that, unlike Dave Chappelle, Ricky now steers largely clear of the sort of material that attracted valid complaints of transphobia on his last special. He laments about politicians getting applause breaks by just telling liberal crowds precisely what they want to hear, conveniently oblivious to the fact that he's doing the exact same thing. They ended their 2.5-star review with, even though Ricky's position on the free speech debate is always clear, it's also getting boring now. Wow. From the Daily Mail, Joe Rogan's podcast comments about Jewish people, quote, controlling the media, unquote, leave Spotify nervous. Sources tell Radar Online that comments like those, plus Joe's past use of racial slurs and COVID misinformation, have pushed Spotify bosses to the edge. However, Chief Executive Daniel Ek said at a company town hall, there are many things that Joe Rogan says that I strongly disagree with and find very offensive. But if we even want a shot at achieving our bold ambitions, it will mean having content on Spotify that many of us may not be proud to be associated with. That's interesting. Bad news for Ronnie Chang. His Hulu comedy pilot is not being picked up to series. In Untitled Pilot, Ronnie Chang would have starred as the newly hired general manager of the Brooklyn Nets. Not much was known about the pilot other than the announcement. Meanwhile, Whitney Cummings spoke to Page Six and said, I don't have to tell you, over the past couple of years, comedy has taken quite the hit. It became super obvious that there were some issues in our society, which, it's usually our job to comment on and confront, and all of a sudden, comedians started becoming like the enemy. Whitney said previously comedians would tackle sensitive subjects to help everybody cope and laugh at horrible things. Then all of a sudden, for a litany of reasons, people started saying comedians are bullies and they're causing violence. And we're like, wait, what? She's out promoting her upcoming roast. She says the reasoning behind the show is she'd like to create a space where comedians don't have to be scared anymore, so we can be the country that at least we've been trying to be. She thinks it's the perfect time to bring roast back and adds, in my opinion, the roasts on Comedy Central started getting racist, actually homophobic. which she partly blames on the decision to roast non-comedians. Pam Anderson being on a roast is like verbal MMA. Her upcoming roast will be on OnlyFans, and she said, "My thing is always follow the sex workers. That's what comedians have always done. We've always been hand in hand with sex workers. Stand-up in America really started in strip clubs, and you know, comics are kind of emotional sex workers." Whitney Cummings presents on OnlyFans Saturday, April 1st. I'll be in the basement with the door closed on OnlyFans watching a roast. What do you think I'm doing?
Welcome to How to Tickle Yourself. I'm your host, Duff McDonald.
And I'm your co-host, Matt McButter. We'll be talking to people who specialize in different ways of inhabiting their own consciousness, from artists to yoga teachers to scientists. We've even got a professional magician.
We're going to ask them questions like, what is consciousness? Why does it tickle? And what is magic anyway? Is it just card tricks, or is it the fact that your little speck of consciousness is part of a perfect possibility machine?
Find us wherever you get your podcasts and at storicmedia.com.
Bert Kreische was on the podcast with David Spade and Dana Carvey. Bert said John Belushi wasn't the comic that Bert Kreische saw in Chris Farley. He says, "I was a Belushi/Farley guy," and says he was talking about some fellow comedians. We were talking about Tommy Boy, and immediately you think Belushi is Farley and David Spade is Aykroyd. But when you look at the Blues Brothers, technically Aykroyd is Farley and Belushi is you, David Spade, because he's more straight-laced. Belushi's the straight man the entire thing. Aykroyd's the one who's putting the super glue on the pedal. He's the one doing all the tricks. He's the one driving crazy. It's so fascinating. Kreische thinks we may misremember John Belushi as primarily anarchic. He points out the only thing Belushi did was Animal House, and he didn't even speak. Then they got into the weeds with this and started comparing the Farley-Belushi thing to all sorts of things, including Wayne's World. David Spade argued that he and Farley are total opposites, while Wayne and Garth are more complementary. Kreische pushed back on that notion, citing the times Mike Myers would turn to the camera and point to Carvey with a "can you believe this guy" reaction. Kreische says someone has to be off and someone's got to be on. And apparently Lorne Michaels has been quoted that Farley was the son that John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd never had. SNL's Chloe Fineman is part of a new scripted fiction podcast on Audible. They keep making these things. I guess they do well because they keep making them, but I see press release and then it seems to have no cultural impact, says the guy in his basement recording podcast. Excessive comes out on Thursday. It stars Chloe Fineman, Joshua Jackson, Kim Cattrall, Amy Sedaris, and a bunch of others. It's a story about a woman whose behavior is described as too much. A trip to Las Vegas, a disappearing romantic interest, and a barrage of text messages she sends to her missing beau. And Chortle reports Graham Linehan turned down £200,000 to take his name off the Father Ted musical. Have you ever seen Father Ted? A very, very funny show. If you ever come across it on a streaming platform, you should watch it. Graham was offered the £200,000 to walk away from the musical so it could be staged without toxic links to his gender wars fights, but he turned it down. Chortle says the producers offered him the money so the attachment of his name would not turn into box office poison. They remind us the writer has been effectively canceled over his vehement campaign over the trans lobby, and backers felt the show had no chance of success if Linehan's name was attached. Graham apparently claimed that the producers wanted him off the project because they were, quote, terrified of their younger members of the staff. Chortle says that Linehan had made a similar claim against the producers of Steve Martin and Martin Short's comedy Only Murders in the Building. The version of the story he tells is they asked him to direct an episode and then withdrew the offer. His telling is, "I said, yes, please, fantastic." And they were like, "Yeah, we'll get in touch with your agent. We'll set it up." Maybe 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. I pick it up and they're like, "Oh, sorry, someone else has taken it." Graham said, "I know exactly what happened. They went out and said, 'Hey, guess what, everyone? We got Graham Linehan.' And then some kooky intern who wears a lot of liner said, 'Oh, he's a bigot.'" In an interview with The Times, he expresses anger at the lack of support he's received from others in the industry. He said, "I thought this would be over in a few months and someone would step in. I really did think as soon as people heard what'd been happening to my children, all my friends, satirists, comedians, progressives, people who marched against the Iraq War, lesbians, gay men, they'd all come rushing to my aid. No one turned up. Just no one turned up. All I got was dirty looks, people ghosting me. I've met people I've worked with, big names, and begged them to become involved. Beg them. Please just say Graham Linehan is right, or Graham Linehan has some important contributions to make on this. Anything that makes it sound as though I'm doing this for anything other than recreational cruelty, that's how I'm portrayed, like a recreational sadist, and none of them will stand up for me." This all started up in 2020. He was permanently banned from Twitter. The Mirror says he reportedly tweeted, "Men aren't women, though," after the Women's Institute sent a happy Pride message to its transgender members. After Elon Musk took over Twitter, Linehan was reinstated. That's your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows. See you tomorrow. Who doesn't like vacations? Do you need some inspiration for your next road trip? Are you excited to get out there and explore the world again? Hi, I'm Johnny Mac. My podcast is called Travel is Back. Travel is Back is travel for regular people. We hop in the car, we fly coach, we use our miles, we eat at normal places, we stay at normal places. So what I do is I hop in the car, I grab my portable recorder, and I go somewhere. Season 3 kicks off with a road trip to Key West. You can check out the back catalog. There are popular episodes covering Chicago, Nashville, Vancouver, Seattle, a whole bunch more. Travel is Back, road trips for regular people. Follow the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your shows. These are quick, these are casual, and it's for regular people like you. Travel is Back.